Bulgarian researcher Sylvie Ivanova asks, who invented most of what we call civilization? Who invented all those things we tend to attribute to a sophisticated and refined society? Everybody knows the answer, she says. The Romans. Through their ingenuity, they built magnificent buildings and engineered masterpieces, such as the water aqueducts and flowing hot water into their villas. The layout of their cities sometimes surpassed even our modern ones due to the precise planning beforehand. Sylvie believes the impression we possess about the Romans was created by our history books and TV documentaries. But even if millions or even billions believe a certain story, this is by itself not proof that the story is true, she says. So, let's look at the actual architectural evidence available and decide if there are actual grounds to believe these stories or not. Firstly, we'll examine the architecture. The people considering themselves respectable academics define the Roman architectural style as a simplified ancient Greek style. Making a rough copy of your neighbour's house can barely be classified as anything innovative. Not to mention how questionable the very term of ancient Greek culture is by itself, that we have a much greater number and far more impressive so-called ancient Greek ruins outside of Greece. But what Sylvie found very interesting was that the so-called academics who also suggested that the ancient Greek civilization rose from the ashes of other cultures like, for example, the Mycenae. During archaeological digs at the Mycenae sites, they not only found developed water supply and sewage systems, but they also possessed running hot water systems even within the second floor of their buildings. These technological developments were not all a product of the Roman genius, as the History Channel is loudly trying to assure us, Sylvia suggests. Everything was already there in a culture that, according to the History Channel, met its final collapse, some at least 1,000 years before the Romans even appeared on the historic scene. Academia classified the Mycenae culture as a Bronze Age civilization. Bronze Age? How do they then explain the machine tool marks, the high-tech tool marks on the lion gate, the chief symbol of their culture? Similar tool marks are found all over the complex of Mycenae in Greece. And all those Bronze Age tools that you see in the museums in high abundance are not capable of producing anything remotely similar to this. The tools and techniques used here were the same as those used on the famous Egyptian and Peruvian megaliths. After the stones were placed, or possibly cast, we don't know yet, were shaped with a tool with one single stroke. Sylvie points out, we have not developed such modern portable tools, which are so powerful that with a single stroke you can shape rows of stones at a height of several floors high. Such tool marks don't fit with the general consensus we are given about the Bronze Age, and this is why they don't show you such images on the History Channel, she suggested. The famous Lion Gate has become an emblematic symbol of the very meaning of Mycenae. It's a completely different style than everything surrounding it, and appears to have been broken even before it was placed. It's quite probable it was an antique already before they made it into the main symbol at the entrance of their city. It's in a style commonly found in Asia Minor, especially at sites that are extremely ancient, sites that have an abundance of high-tech tool marks as well. The lions of Mycenae also appear to have been cut with a tool. That is definitely not Bronze Age. To be frank, Sylvie didn't see any grounds whatsoever to consider the Mycenae to be considered a separate culture or to be kept outside the label of civilization. It is extremely unlikely, she suggests, that they invented anything at all either. Instead, we see here a degradation in terms of techniques and tools compared to the older megaliths from where they took the lion figures. And whatever they built wasn't a unique style of their own. The Mycenae walls were commonplace for the Mediterranean region, especially in Italy. This is the cistern of Mycenae. It is built in a style very common for Italy and especially for Sardinia. The Mycenaean symbols used to depict griffins are in no way unique or peculiar to the region. They are exceptionally similar to the griffins worshipped and revered all over Asia and Europe. Such high-tech tool marks are not found on Mycenaean sites exclusively. They can be spotted at a number of alleged ancient Greek sites, and here, every well-read penguin will tell you, "Oh yeah, we knew that a long time ago." Ancient Greek sites are often built on the foundation of older places of worship. An academic still arguing, who were the people that came here before? And they're still arguing. Let them argue to their heart's content, Sylvia suggests. But why are they concealing the facts from us? The facts about what they have actually excavated. Namely, up to 6 successive layers below each other, some of them eroded, means the buildings on top were built after the previous one had fallen. This means a great expanse of time between the layers. And most importantly, with each successive and deeper layer, the quality of masonry increases considerably. And it is not just the size of the megalithic blocks that gets bigger as the layers get lower and lower. Also the precision of the quality of the masonry work and the changes of spotting high-tech tool marks will also increase with the deeper layers. In other words, gradual building degradation is clearly visible. Instead of that, they're bamboozling us with talks about discovering and innovating. This is not just a falsified version of history, Sylvia says. They have also actively covered up the valuable artifacts of the older civilizations. Here, she suggests, are some cutting tool marks which are barely visible. The lower layers are submerged under modern building materials. And all this is going under the misleading slogans of preservation and restoration. In reality, most of what the general tourist would see on the so-called ancient Greek sites are modern buildings, some of them artificially aged. And at locations where the so-called restoration has not yet managed to erase all traces of the real stuff, we see things like this, for example. Protrusions on the stones, identical to protrusions found in the Peruvian megaliths, the pyramids in Egypt, Baalbek, and the French aqueducts. And it was the same people who built them all over the world. It wasn't the Bronze Age savages who didn't know what was beyond their village. This is a polygonal megalithic masonry from Greece. You will see almost identical patterns in Turkey and in Cusco in Peru. These are clamps used on the megalithic sites in Greece, which are identical to those used in South America, Africa, Asia, and Europe. Sylvia explores her original question. Did the Romans invent any of the associations attributed to what we call civilization? What about the Roman water aqueducts, for example, built with such precision that they were accurate to a millimeter? Interestingly enough, impressive Roman aqueducts are found in abundance in dozens, if not in hundreds throughout the Americas, many in Mexico. Historians assure us that the colonists built them because of their compassion for the locals. Did they? Strange that some of the aqueducts usually fed pre-Columbian cities like those of the Aztecs. It is also somewhat mysterious that the colonists, who allegedly possessed such compassion for the locals, that they used time travel to go back to the Roman period to learn how to build the aqueducts. After the colonists met the local population somehow, a very small fraction of the local population remained alive. Sylvia suggests that the Roman aqueducts in America would be a particular curiosity of history that we simply couldn't understand or explain if there weren't hundreds, if not thousands, of Roman artifacts found in the Americas, as we're going to see in the episode about the Americas. She believes that the aqueducts are some sort of strange exception if there weren't what we call European-style ports submerged in the Bahamas, along with ruins of large platforms and foundations of buildings in similar style. So the documentary is not going to be, oh, it wasn't the Romans, it was actually their neighbours. No. She is going to touch on much more fundamental problems, like the fact that we have been indoctrinated into believing so many mistaken terms in which we try to define our history that sometimes we lack even basics, such as the vocabulary, to start investigating what actually happened in the past. For example, there are cities in South America where Greco-Roman statues were found. Again, we're told it was all done by the colonists. Which colonists? The ones that were burning people alive just to make them Christian? The ones who devoted their entire lives to fighting paganism, she suggests? We're supposed to believe that these were the same people who carved fantastic statues of the very same gods of the pagans, inviting women barely dressed and men wearing only a vine leaf, and placed them on top of their most respected social buildings in the cities? So getting back to the Romans, this is how the mass media confirms the fraudulent history already taught in the school system. They try to convince us, she said, like those mosaics with girls in bikinis, with claims such as, you see, they were so advanced that they had bikinis. They invented the bikini during those times. And people are convinced and say, yeah, it must be true. You see the old mosaics with the bikinis, without considering that nowhere on this mosaic is written that these are the first prototypes of bikinis. It's absolutely possible that the women had bikinis even before that. We simply don't have images older than this. Since the Romans did not invent their own Roman togas, why should we think that they invented even their Roman underwear, she suggests. There are Thracian images of people wearing those very same togas, and these were cultures that predated the Romans. And these are your Roman togas, which many millions of women wear even nowadays in Asia. And although the outfits of the Thracians and the so-called Roman togas and the saris of India are absolutely identical, people don't even notice it. They are so accustomed to taking the official quackademic historical labels as some sort of science that they don't even bother to question, she said. Sylvia is not talking about some minor details of the so-called mysteries, small, unexplained parts of our past. No. Even the very fundamentals of the so-called history, of the official history taught in schools, does not match the artifacts, does not match the historic sites. And not only the ancient history, even the relatively recent history, as much as 100 years ago. She goes on to explain, guess which city this is. She gives us some clues. The person was a resident of this city. This is how it looks nowadays. The answer to the quiz is Tokyo. How many of you got that right? She says those things shouldn't have been there, because when European people were building the so-called New Classical style, which is another extremely misleading label, Japan lived in almost complete isolation from the rest of the world. So blinded in their fantastic beliefs and the quackademic stories about history, Sylvia suggested people just assumed that they must have been built after Japan got opened up to the world. But was this really possible? This means clearing up large parts, the very central parts of the traditional cities, just completely demolishing all buildings. Nothing like this is ever recorded. But just imagine it is really thinkable that the Japanese people, the traditional Japanese people, would have demolished their very best buildings without telling anybody, without recording it anywhere. Bring a bunch of foreigners, which they don't even trust, even nowadays, to build new centres of all their cities from scratch in a style which at the time is already going out of fashion. This man, by the way, is a unique photograph from a Japanese museum of one of the last royal samurais. He shouldn't have looked like that. From the stories we are told by the Quackademia, this is how real samurais should have looked. That's how people think. Well, these are actually actors. And it's not just the style that shouldn't have been there, if the official history was correct. Also, there are megaliths woven within the structure of these very same buildings that should not have been. And not just any megaliths, but polygonal megaliths, very much like those of Peru, Turkey, and Egypt. There is no coincidence. Even the clamps match the clamps of the megaliths on other continents, which the official Quackademia is indirectly trying to trick us into thinking that they're from some extremely old and forgotten civilization. A disappeared civilization. A lost civilization that they don't even bother to trace. It's so far away in time. No, it wasn't so far away back in time, Sylvia believes. At least its end. Yes, she believes the civilization might have existed for an extremely long time, but its demise was very recent. Now we have reached the time to become aware that someone has been seriously tampering with our history. And if we really want to know how things really were, we'll have to start recovering the true history almost from scratch. She proposes that since we don't have any luck with the Romans in terms of finding any actual proof they did indeed place the bedrock of what we call civilization, let's try with some other famous ancient civilization. For example, the Indus Valley. Also known as the Harappan civilization, its most famous site probably being Mohenjo-daro. Official academics propose it's thousands of years old. That's deep antiquity. God knows if those dates are true because, as we're going to discover in later episodes, anything older than 200 years is highly questionable, and anything older than 500 years is most likely pure fantasy. But let's, for argument's sake, assume that these dates are correct. So let's see what we read in the actual notes of the archaeologists who were digging at the site. A couple of distinct periods are clearly visible. Of course, it was a long span of time, so it's normal that different cultures inhabited it. So the very first layer, from the very beginning, from scratch, there was central planning. There was sewage. There was flowing water. There were wells. Everything was laid out on the plan before even the city appeared. So it wasn't just a settlement, and over a period of time, a few more people joined and decided to, let's build a house. No. There was central planning from the very beginning. And not only the cities were pre-laid, with the streets straight and everything, the full civilization was centrally planned. There were factories manufacturing various goods which was remarkably well organized. Certain parts would be manufactured in a given city, and then transport would be organized. The full manufacturing process would continue in another city. Sylvia suggests we are already talking about a well-organized infrastructure with complex components. However, this golden period ends by people simply dying on the streets. There's nobody even to bury them. Over the ages, there have been whispers that it is all a mystery. This is a proven trick. It works to tell its mystery so that we can ignore the legends which tell us in detail what kind of weapons were killing people like this. And of course, now the full site is restored, improved. The situation cannot be studied anymore. The skeletons are no longer there. The destruction of the buildings also cannot be studied. Was there really an epicenter, as some say? We don't know anymore. A perfect collection of evidence. Destroyed. The next culture and inhabitants to come to the site of Mohenjo-Daro, they have difficulty maintaining the infrastructure, even when they find it already basically ready-made. For example, the water supply system starts deteriorating because of its lack of maintenance. The public wells don't get serviced fast enough, and things like that, Sylvia states. Then as more cultures use the site, it progressively gets worse and worse. They cannot maintain it, and at the end, it boils down to living in torn-down houses. Where the roof is still standing, they inhabit those rooms, and they even start using the houses in some of the quarters as burial chambers. In other words, the organised society has simply fallen apart. It's gone into total decay. Sylvia asks, where in all this do we see any progression, any innovation, any discoveries, any progress? Nowhere. Instead, we see a straightforward confirmation of the legends, which are, by the way, the oral history that has survived to present day. It has survived the destruction of the old authentic books. And not only the degradation proves the legends are more reliable history than what we commonly see on TV, but also the fact that knowledge comes in a ready-made form, exactly as the legends from all continents describe it. Somebody comes and teaches the people arts, medicine, installs social law, establishes infrastructure, and teaches people how to maintain it. There were no findings suggesting that before the Indus Valley civilization in these regions, there was any sophistication whatsoever. Any gradual formation of anything at all. It just came in a ready-made form. And, in addition to all of that, the swastika symbol was also found in Mohenjo-Daro, an extremely ancient symbol of good luck and prosperity, which again, strange enough, appears at various other places in other continents where the advanced knowledge all of a sudden appears out of nowhere. Sylvia suggests that in terms of the role of organised religion in present society, it seems that relatively few people actually meet God face to face after being members of a particular group. But there is something else that has been working very effectively. People's consciousness is flooded daily by numerous stories of individuals acting valiantly, led by religious fanaticism. Following modern media for even a couple of minutes, one falls into the state of hypnosis. Although it is a light hypnosis, it is by very definition a state of hypnosis, placing us in a mode of high susceptibility. In one of the following episodes about religion, you will be surprised to discover that completely different times were upon us. Times when, for example, when elements of Christian and Islamic beliefs were actually one and the same religion. As strange as this may sound, there are a lot of artifacts supporting this belief, Sylvia claims. For example, European kings from Russia and Germany wore Arabic religious inscriptions on their helmets and on their weaponry. Quotes from the Quran were inscribed basically along with perfectly Christian-looking inscriptions. At the same time, rulers in West Asia, which are now classified as purely Muslim, were minting coins and depicting themselves with Christian crosses and other attributes, now officially labelled as purely Christian. The official explanation for all of this is that the Christian kings wore these designed elements for decoration without understanding their actual translation. And the German king, for instance, had lost his mantle, and he wore the Arabic one he had taken from some conquered Arabic tribe and decided to use their lovely mantle instead. Really? She suggests. The German king was wearing a second-hand dress from minor tribes he had no connection with. And as far as the coins, we were told the people who minted the coins, they just decided to copy European designs without understanding what was actually on them. Really? Was there such a lack of designs all over Asia, she asks. But of course, academia needs little evidence to make such laughable explanations, she says. In most cases, the uncomfortable artifacts simply never reach the public attention. And even when people do notice and think, this doesn't sound right, they don't even know what to make of it because they are tamed by our media to classify it as some sort of strange mystery. Mysterious parts of our past that we cannot figure out. Another very clever trick is to always present and study our history fragmented. Most people are restricted to the history of their own region of the world. But runic writing found in Europe, Asia and Africa possibly share some variations in the Americas. As artifacts with runes are found in the territories of different countries, they are labelled as completely independent writing systems, so that people don't figure it out. In the past, we were all one big, happy family. And then we might be left wondering, is it really possible that so many historians all over the centuries and thousands of years have made such blunt mistakes and imagined history disconnected from the artifacts and historical sites? How is that even possible? No, Sylvia suggests, it is not possible. But the timeline that our history teacher told us in school is actually fiction, mixed with half-truth. And all that was cooked mostly during the time of the Reformation, when history was transformed from a science of studying the past to a method of modifying the consciousness of the masses by making them identify with something we are actually not. When people got convinced that they are descendants of savages and monkeys, they no longer believe or forgot they can claim their rightful heritage as both students and children in the most direct sense of advanced celestial beings. After a substantial amount of the genuine historical chronicles were burned during the Reformation, tossed in the fires along with their authors, did the new fictional history become compiled? It was done mainly by two people, Joseph Scaliger and Dionysius. Most of what is seen as history today is based exclusively on the work of these two people. There are claims and speculations that their works are based on old chronicles indeed, but none of these old chronicles have survived that we know of. So basically, all we can do is hope that there is some truth in it. And as far as those old Roman and ancient Greek works that are quoted and taken as indisputable truth, we don't have the original words anywhere, but we have alleged copies. When a small group of Jesuit monks were making these copies, they wrote in the preface, "We're copying and correcting it to make it fit the new history." After each and every copy was ready, a misfortunate fire seemed to erupt in the libraries and burned only the originals. However, the newly made copies that were on the next shelf always survived the fires. What a strange coincidence. If you were to discuss this issue with a modern quackademic, he will tell you that the Scaliger and Dionysius simply did not have the time nor resources to provide solid proof for the historic timeline they suggested. But somehow or other, they must have been using some old sources which were correct because their timeline has been conclusively proven to be right by the modern advanced dating methods. Like carbon dating, dendrochronology and others. Well, That is one elegant explanation, and that is why the next episode will be exclusively about these dating methods. Sylvia will explore if the methods used hold any water. She speculates, if they don't hold water, then why is it commonly accepted practice in most laboratories who do carbon dating nowadays to require, along with every sample submitted, a suggested historic period to which the given sample should belong? And the suggested date is always right. Isn't that fabulous? She asks. Bulgarian researcher Silvia Ivanova believes that it is commonly misunderstood in these modern times that the historical estimations made by French religious leader Joseph Scaliger regarding the timing of historic events has been confirmed by modern scientific dating methods, and this is very important because his estimations are practically taken as verified and proven scientific history. It is worth investigating what this so-called history is actually based on, and whether it's science or assumptions over history. The idea that it is scientific is far from the truth, Sylvia suggests. And in this video, we will be reviewing very briefly the methods of carbon dating, followed by dendrochronology to explain why this carbon dating, also known as radiocarbon dating, is a method of determining the age of an object containing organic material. By using the properties of radiocarbon, which is a radioactive isotope of carbon. When an animal or plant dies, it stops exchanging carbon with its environment, and from that point onwards, the amount of radiocarbon that it contains begins to reduce due to radioactive decay. Measuring the amount of radiocarbon in a sample from a dead plant or animal, such as a piece of wood or a fragment of bone, provides information that can be used to calculate when the animal or plant died. So far, so good. However, the speed of this radioactive decay is unknown. And determining that speed is not so easy, the way we did it was by taking samples from dead animals or plants which have died at a time that is considered to be known for sure, and then from that calculate what the rate of decay is of the radiocarbon. One of the main events that is being considered while making these calculations of the decay rate is the eruption of a volcano near Pompeii, which buried the entire city along with its residents under a thick layer of ash. God knows, however, the date when that happened, as it's not really known for sure, and readily accepted the date was taken from the Scaliger timeline. This date cannot be confirmed to begin with. You may find it interesting, Sylvia continues as she points out the fact that actually Pompeii most likely was buried just a few hundred years ago. More information on this topic will be covered in future episodes of the Roman Empire. Besides radiocarbon dating being based on an unknown factor, which is the rate of decay, the laboratory equipment required for this method of testing is extremely sophisticated, and according to the opinions of some modern scientists, it gives absolutely inaccurate results. Very often, to test a single piece, the proper way to do it is to have 4 or 5 laboratories do it absolutely independently, and then to publish the results in terms of a range, because, as it is, we always get the results from the perspective of one lab, which suggests a time period. However, the more labs used, laboratories actually give a wide range of time periods. But we do not get that information. Instead, she suggests, we get what some so-called historian interprets the time period to be. Sylvia suggests this documentary, which is about the survivors of Atlantis, will concentrate upon the last few thousand years mainly, and since according to mainstream science, carbon dating gives normally an accuracy range of some 2,000 years, that practically means it cannot be applied to the recent history anyway. Another problem with carbon dating, she denotes, is selectively taking samples. For example, a piece of bone found near a building is used to determine the date of the building. Actually, it is absolutely possible that the animal to whom the bone belonged lived in a completely different time period, and not the period when the structure was actually built. Now, a few words about dendrochronology, or informally known as tree ring dating. The idea behind this is that every year the trees forms a growth ring, and are suggested to be sensitive, in particular, to different climatic conditions. Different rings form, however, by different kinds of trees. And even the same species of tree can record a very different record if located in another area. This is why, to use this method of data with an object, we must be sure the wood was within the same vicinity as the artifact, and that it is the same type as the one that the scientist has the chart for. Now, about these charts, Sylvia addresses. For example, we have a 100-year-old chart ring, but to extend the chart further back in time, we'll need to find another one that is 150 years old. And in order to see that, some of the rings will be matching. And in this way, she continues, we can extend the chart 50 years further back in time. To continue the process, we would need another cherry tree, which is slightly older than the one we have, So some of the rings overlap, and so on, and so on. What you see now is an actual dendrochronology graph that contains many white spots. These trees must come from the same area. The research paths are very difficult to follow, and because the lines are broken and are not continuous at the end, we can see that dendrochronology is becoming a very subjective method of dating. And it should be used in very, very rare cases, because the sample of dating must be big enough. And often, when the builders of the ancient times would use wooden locks, they would actually chop off a lot of the rings on the side to make a beam, and that would make the dating very, very inaccurate. Questions could not be answered, such as when the tree was alive, when did they cut it, when did they use it, and when did they reuse it. Sylvia goes on to summarise that tree ring dating is absolutely reliable and a genuine scientific dating method. However, its application is extremely limited to the point that it practically has no value in confirming this categorical version of history as genuine, because all the white gaps between the black lines on this chart signify unknown periods. These unknown gaps are adjusted in such a way that will fit the Skelliger version of history, and again we cannot say that they confirm it simply because they are based on it. A great number of modern historic dating methods appeared in recent years. They are sophisticated and possess very scientifically orientated names, which alone create the impression that men have learned this and men have worked on it, Sylvia said. In reality, they are all either derived from carbon dating, or they're simply a variety of carbon dating. And that is why they all suffer from the fundamental problem of carbon dating. It is all based on an unknown parameter, the speed of decay of carbon. Sylvia went on to take a brief look back to the point in time when the fraudulent Scaligor history was imposed upon humanity with military power. Those were very turbulent times, she pointed out, for Europe. The royal dynasties were changing one after another, for example, in England. The Tudors were replaced by the Stuarts, whilst in France the throne was taken by the Bournes, and in Russia the traditional Ludwig dynasty was replaced by the Romanovs, who did not have any rights to be on the throne. She suggested in the background of all these events they were orchestrated by the parasites who were applying the method of divide and conquer. By that time, they managed to successfully lower the consciousness of the human race to the point that there was no need to kill them anymore. The people started killing each other. The actual intention and the events of the Reformation are not the reasons we hear about today. They're distorted, and the proof of that is a very inconsistent story that we hear nowadays. She suggested we are being told the main reason for the movement of the people was the unlimited power of the Roman Catholic Church. As far as the Pope being unpopular, that was absolutely true. However, as far as any actual ruling power was concerned, they didn't seem to have a match of that at this point in time. In Spain, during the 15th century and before the Reformation started, the authority over the Inquisition was handed over to the king in the year 1515. The French king was victorious in a battle against the allied forces of the Polish-Swiss armies. The French king had the full right to appoint the clergy and to manage it. Simply, he had full control over the church, and from that time on, even the Pope himself was obliged to consult the French king, even when taking decisions concerning his own domain, and even the official version of history agrees with that fact. Moreover, she continued, they tell us at that time the clergy were as rich as beggars and often had to sell cattle to have something to eat. So all this talk of an unlimited power of the Pope is just rubbish, because at this point, even according to the official history, he did not have as much social influence or any other. Since the first reason of the Reformation is no good, she said, let's see if the others will make more sense. Martin Luther is considered to be the seminal figure of the Reformation, and he proposed that Christianity should be nearer to the simple folk. He translated the Bible from Latin to a more understandable German language, and he also convinced the people that there should be no images in the churches, no statues of the saints, and there should be no organ music during the church services or ringing of the church bells. We are apparently asked to believe that he didn't like organ music or church bells during the service, and the result was a complete devastation of entire regions due to famine and disease, wiping out most of the population of entire countries. War bankrupted most of the combatant powers, and severe hardships fell on the inhabitants of occupied territories. And this was also one of the longest, most destructive series of wars in the European history, which spanned 30 years. She asks, do you believe that people did all this because of the style of music being played in the churches? But let's get back to the list of official reasons for the Reformation. The next one is that people felt nostalgic for the old and a pure form of Christianity. They wanted to reinstate it again. That is one beautiful and intellectual concept. However, intellectuals write books, she said, and envision educational projects, whilst those who care nothing for books go to the battlefield. When a peasant upheaval in Germany started, the very founder of the Protestant movement, Martin Luther, did not support it. Instead, he preached that the peasants should always, under all circumstances, obey their masters. A confirmation of his views in regards to the peasants' actions taken from the mainstream history is that he ordered a governess at the time to kill the peasants who were revolting, and was quoted as saying, to kill them like dogs that were sick with rabies. Sylvie claims the more we read, the more we understand that it wasn't Martin Luther who caused this most bloody series of wars. It wasn't the church music nor the statues of saints in the churches. Since the Revolution, for the most bloody wars, it has become very uncomfortable for the core of mainstream historians as they try to invent all kinds of artificial reasons for them. She leads on that one reason is a real masterpiece of human stupidity, which describes how some modern historians are attempting to explain a bloody conflict between the Czechs and the Germans during the Reformation as being the result of too much masculine energy which boiled in their veins, and they had no outlet for this energy. Sylvia believes this was a concocted masterpiece. By the time the conflict was over, the population of the Czech Republic had decreased several times. When their blood had stopped boiling, that's why they stopped fighting. The Reformation was a very long and very bloody war. That was a purely political event. Why are historians trying to present it as some sort of intellectual dream about organ music and statues in the temples, she asks. The actual reason is that all this war was about the parasites trying to break the empire of the descendants of the survivors into pieces and then destroy these pieces one by one. The parasites wanted the war, but they also wanted to make sure that the empire and the knowledge of the survivors would never be resurrected. And for this reason, Sylvie suggests they decided to fabricate fraudulent history, and in that rodent history, they did not even mention the very existence of the empire, which the rest of the following episodes are about. The empire are the descendants of the survivors who kept the history about them alive. They remembered who they were, and they possessed a great deal of knowledge that survived.